1. Introduction. RAWSEP view. The United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only. For home building and furniture building. For just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable. Wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree, but it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM 2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lungs, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM 2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom, the Eco-Design Wood Stove, and International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RAWSEP view. Purple air. PM 2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM 2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM 2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.
Hi, my name is Lily. Andrew gave you the intro to Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates and their concern for air pollution from indoor residential wood burning. Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates, or RAWSEP, would like every near neighbor of an indoor residential wood burner whose wood smoke enters their yards and sickens the near neighbors to have a purple air PM 2.5 monitor hanging from the eaves of their home to measure the level of PM 2.5 entering their yards. That measurement of air pollution should be used as evidence of unnecessary air pollution, and each indoor residential wood burner should be shut down based on that evidence, one indoor residential wood burner at a time if necessary. The presentation by Andrew ended at 2 minutes 5 seconds. The same presentation by Emma starts at 2 minutes 3 seconds before the end of this podcast. So I am Lily, your timekeeper, and you can start the next podcast at 2 minutes 5 seconds in if you would not like to see the presentation by Andrew a second time. This presentation by me, Lily, ends at 5 minutes in. What you will see in the main content of this RAWSEP podcast will be news about air pollution from indoor residential wood burning, and how that air pollution is being combated by ordinary people just like you who are unfortunately near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners at this time. There will also be news about unnecessary and highly polluting use of wood as fuel in industrial wood burners and preventable air pollution from wood burning wildfires. There will also be news about air pollution from PM 2.5 from gas-powered cars. There will also be news about airborne diseases which are also preventable with vaccines such as COVID-19 and measles and whooping cough, to name just a few. In 2025, Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates is also concerned with combating the Trump destruction of government funding for programs which protect human health through the Department of Health and Human Services, and Trump destruction of programs which fund the science and medical research plan to protect human health from preventable illnesses. Protecting human health is a patriotic act, and our defense against enemies is weakened if we are not as healthy as we can be. Heat pump rebates are now offered by the federal government, distributed through the eligible United States, are available in 2025, and are the best, cleanest, and now cheapest alternative to indoor residential wood burning if that burning is actually done to purportedly save money. Wind and solar as sources of the electricity that powers heat pumps and electric cars is also cheaper than burning wood. The adverse health effects that are caused by indoor residential wood burning also come at a cost to near neighbors, both in shortening and ending their lives, and in actual hospital, clinic, and funeral costs. Instead of being compensated monetarily, near neighbors should instead be able to achieve immediate relief by stopping indoor residential wood burning in their hyper-localized neighborhoods, which relief readings from purple air PM 2.5 monitors used as evidence of air pollution will help them achieve. Welcome to news about hopeful scientific and medical achievements that will also help us achieve the goal of clean air to breathe.
Webisode 57DHYAE December 14, 2025 Misinformation by Germany AfD and by fossil fuel companies. 1. The far right in Germany keeps trying to unseal national secrets. 2. Germany accuses Russia of sabotage, cyberattacks, and disinformation. 3. Vaccines help protect your heart, for some children have died after taking COVID-19 vaccines, claims the current Trump-appointed FDA top regulator. Elsewhere, doctors and scientists declared that absolutely no evidence links COVID-19 vaccines to death in children. 5. Fossil fuel companies promote false promises and solutions for solving climate change. 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 headlines. Main content. 1. Germany. The German far right keeps trying to unseal national secrets, say lawmakers who are opponents of AfD. These lawmakers say that the AfD push to publish sensitive details about national security could benefit Russian military planning. AfD leaders Tino Chrupalla and Alice Weidel have defended the alternative for Germany AfD party against accusations of compromising national security. Reporting was done from Berlin and Erfurt, a city in eastern Germany where far-right lawmakers have made dozens of requests for sensitive information. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against would smoke emission particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, December 14, 2025. One far-right lawmaker demanded that the German authorities reveal the exact routes used by the German military to take supplies to Ukraine. A second pushed the government to disclose whether it had provided Ukraine with a long-range rocket system capable of striking deep inside Russia. A third wanted officials to reveal if the German army used drones to patrol its eastern border. Lawmakers from the far-right Alternative for Germany, or AfD, have set off a political furor in Germany by repeatedly using their constitutional powers to press government agencies to publish sensitive details related to national security. The AfD members have made more than 7,000 attempts in the past 5 years to unseal this kind of secret information. Opponents of AfD say the publication of such secret information, parts of which relate to German support for Ukraine, could benefit Russian military planning. These claims, which the party strongly denies, have heightened concerns about the AfD relationship with Russia. Lawmakers of the AfD party have praised Putin, often visited counterparts in Russia or at the Russian embassy in Berlin, and questioned German support for Ukraine. The German parliament held a debate early last month about the AfD questions, during which mainstream lawmakers made rancorous accusations about their far-right colleagues. Jens Spahn, a senior lawmaker from the governing Christian Democrat Party, said during a later parliamentary debate that Alice Weidel, the other AfD chair, sounded like a fifth column for Putin, trying to defuse the fallout. Some senior AfD leaders tried to distance the party from Russia, criticizing AfD colleagues who had planned trips to meet Russian officials, highlighting a divide within the party on the issue. Last month, at the height of the dispute, senior AfD lawmakers persuaded colleagues to cancel a meeting with Dmitri Medvedev, the former Russian president, during their visit to Russia, but the actions of other leaders fueled further criticism when Chrupalla, the senior AfD official, went on public TV last month to try to clear up the AfD view of Russia. He ended up downplaying the risk that Putin of Russia posed to Germany. Chrupalla suggested that Poland, one of the closest allies of Germany, was also a threat. About Putin, he said, he has never done anything to me. 2. Germany accuses Russia of sabotage, cyberattacks, and disinformation. The German Foreign Ministry announcement, which Russia denied, was the latest suggestion of growing Russian aggression in Europe. A spokesman for the German Foreign Affairs Ministry said Friday that Russia spread misinformation about major candidates in the general election this year. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against would smoke emission particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, December 12, 2025. Germany accused Russia on Friday of using cyberattacks, espionage, and disinformation campaigns to undermine the German infrastructure and social cohesion. In the latest suggestion that Russian aggression has spilled beyond Ukraine into other parts of Europe, the German government announced it had summoned the Russian ambassador in Berlin to lodge a formal complaint about acts that it said had included a cyberattack on air traffic control in August 2024 in an attempt to spread disinformation about German politicians during a general election campaign earlier this year. For some time now, we have been observing a massive increase in threatening hybrid activity by Russia, ranging from disinformation campaigns to espionage and cyberattacks to attempts at sabotage, said Martin Giese, a spokesman for the German Foreign Ministry, at a press briefing in Berlin on Friday. Based on comprehensive analysis by the German intelligence services, we have been able to clearly identify the Moscow signature and prove its responsibility. Mr. Giese attributed the misinformation to a group called Storm 1516. The government had previously said the group spread false claims that Friedrich Merz, who became chancellor after the election, experienced mental health episodes that required hospitalization. Robert Habeck, a leading politician from the Green Party, had mistreated a child, and Annalena Baerbock, then foreign minister, had an affair with a sex worker. In recent years, tensions between the two countries have become increasingly common and public. In May 2023, Germany ordered the closure of 4 of the 5 Russian consulates in the country to close after Moscow limited the number of German diplomatic staff members allowed in Russia. The chiefs of 3 German intelligence agencies said in a rare public testimony in October 2024 that they had proof that Russia was targeting the country in hybrid attacks. In September, Mr. Merz said in a newspaper interview, "We are not at war, but we no longer live in peace either." 3. Vaccines help protect your heart. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against would smoke emission particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. American Association for Retired Persons, ARP. Vaccines and heart health. Vaccines do not just help fight off some pretty nasty illnesses. Research suggests they can also help protect your heart. A study published in the AHA journal Stroke found that people who were hospitalized for a flu-like illness were 38% more likely than adults hospitalized for other reasons to have a stroke within a month of their hospitalization. Receiving a flu vaccine within the year before hospitalization lowered stroke risk of a person to 11%. A study published in the journal Circulation found that people with heart failure who got an annual flu vaccine were 18% less likely to die from cardiovascular disease or any other cause than those who did not get a flu shot. A study presented at the American Stroke Association International Stroke Conference in 2020 found that the shingles vaccine may reduce stroke risk by about 16% in older adults. A study published in JAMA Network found that full vaccination against COVID-19 treatment was associated with a reduced risk of heart attack and ischemic stroke after a coronavirus infection, source American Heart Association. Some children have died after taking COVID-19 vaccines, claims the current Trump-appointed FDA top regulator. Elsewhere, doctors and scientists declared that absolutely no evidence links COVID-19 vaccines to death in children. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The Atlantic. December 8, 2025. Photo of someone holding a small child who has just received an injection on the Friday after Thanksgiving. Vinay Prasad, the FDA top vaccine regulator, made a claim that shocked the public health establishment for the first time. He wrote in a leaked email to his staff, the U.S. FDA will acknowledge that COVID-19 vaccines have killed American children. The agency had supposedly identified at least 10 children who died from getting COVID shots. To say the email was poorly received by vaccine experts and physicians would be an understatement. The Prasad claim provoked a rapid series of rebuttals. A response from 12 former FDA commissioners published in the New England Journal of Medicine on Wednesday called the Prasad memo a threat to evidence-based vaccine policy and public health security. All of the potential vaccine-related deaths reported to the government, presumably including those to which Prasad referred, had already been reviewed by the FDA staff. The former commissioners wrote, and different conclusions had been reached. Elsewhere, doctors and scientists declared that absolutely no evidence links COVID-19 vaccines to death in children, and that in order to suggest otherwise, Prasad and his colleagues had engaged in an evidence manufacturing mission. A dumpster dive for shoddy data, or worse, a campaign of lying. Prasad is among the public health officials who, under the leadership of RFK Jr., have been systematically undermining the confidence of Americans in immunizations. Prasad has not yet offered up any documentation to support his assertion, and his count of vaccine-related deaths may well turn out to be inflated. The overheated rhetoric of the memo and lengthy recitation of political grievances also raise some doubts about his 5 fossil fuel companies promote false promises and solutions for solving climate change. The report Deceptive Climate Ads by Big Oil identifies 7 categories of deceptive advertising, including 1. Overstating actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, 2. Exaggerating investments in renewable energy, 3. Deflecting responsibility by shifting it onto consumers, and 4, 5, 6, 7. Falsely promoting 4. Natural gas, 5. Carbon capture, 6. Hydrogen, and 7. Algae biofuels as viable climate solutions. RAWSEP view. When an oil company states they are using renewables, RAWSEP always asks if the renewable they are using is a clean renewable, like wind and solar or geothermal, or a dirty renewable, like burning wood. The burning of wood emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 and CO2 emissions from burning the fossil fuel coal, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.55 as burning the fossil fuel. Natural gas, using the word biofuel, such as the algae biofuel, implies that use is green, but burning a biofuel, whether it is algae or wood, creates harmful air-polluting emissions, where using wind or solar does not produce harmful emissions. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. Inside Climate News, December 12, 2025. 4 of the biggest oil and gas companies in the world have spent the last 25 years deceptively portraying themselves as leaders in addressing climate change while simultaneously expanding fossil fuel production and failing to meaningfully rein in their planet heating emissions, according to a report released Thursday that examined over 300 of the climate-related advertisements of the 4 companies from 2000 to 2025. These ads collectively serve to mask the harmful impacts of the operations of the oil companies and to perpetuate a false narrative that the oil industry is an essential partner in the fight against climate change. The Center for Climate Integrity found CCI, a Washington, D.C.-based advocacy organization supporting efforts to hold fossil fuel companies accountable for climate harms, said its analysis is the first of its kind, scrutinizing hundreds of climate-relevant ads from BP, Chevron, ExxonMobil, and Shell across the first quarter of this century. It was around the turn of the century when outright denial of the reality of climate change had become untenable that the fossil fuel industry pivoted in its messaging and advertising strategy toward promoting false promises and solutions for tackling the problem. CCI says in the Big Oil Deceptive Climate Ads, the report identifies and discusses 7 categories of deceptive advertising during this time period, including 1. Overstating actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, 2. Exaggerating investments in renewable energy, 3. Deflecting responsibility by shifting it on to consumers, and 4, 5, 6, 7. Falsely promoting 4. Natural gas, 5. Carbon capture, 6. Hydrogen, and 7. Algae biofuels as viable climate solutions. The big oil climate deception has evolved from lying about the problem to lying about solutions. For 2.5 decades now, these companies have sold the public a false and misleading image of their industry as working to solve the climate crisis. A joint staff report from Democrats on the House Oversight Committee and the Senate Budget Committee released last year documents how major oil companies use what the Democrats described as deceptive messaging and tactics to promote false promises of new technologies and to mislead about their commitments to reducing emissions and about the climate safety of natural gas. The report marked the culmination of a multiple-year investigation that involved hearings and subpoenas and revealed numerous internal company documents, as this joint report makes clear the outright denial of climate change by the oil industry has evolved into a green-seeming cover for its ongoing covert operation, a campaign of deception, disinformation, and doublespeak waged using dark money, phony front groups, false economics, and relentless exertion of political influence to block climate progress. U.S. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat of Rhode Island, then chair of the Senate Budget Committee, said greenwashed or deceptive advertising has also been a key part of this campaign in advertisements targeting the public. These 4 big oil companies repeatedly misrepresented the sustainability of their business practices, deflected responsibility for fueling climate harms, and lied about the viability of their proposed climate solutions, from carbon capture and storage to algae biofuels. Ads touting the BP, Chevron, Shell, and ExxonMobil emission reduction initiatives overinflate the impact of these actions and create a misleading impression that the companies have dramatically lowered their overall emissions, but in reality the actions typically are limited to oil company operational emissions such as reducing flaring and do not account for emissions generated by their products, which make up the vast majority of their carbon pollution. Ads highlighting future plans or promises to reduce emissions and transition to low-carbon business models are misleading, considering that the companies are now rolling back their green commitments in 2024, less than 4 years after advertising plans to change their business plans to support a shift towards net zero emissions. BP and Shell both abandoned goals to significantly reduce emissions. Some other ads from these companies published since 2000 depict them embracing renewable energy like wind and solar, but as the report says, this obscures the reality that actual investments of oil companies in renewables are minuscule. RAWSEP interjects that there are also dirty renewables and clean renewables, and it is unclear from this article if clean renewables rather than dirty renewables like wood burning are being referred to in this article. Back to the Article 1 analysis found that between 2010 and 2018 BP spent only 2.3% of its total capital expenditure on renewables, Shell spent 1.3%, Chevron spent 0.23%, and ExxonMobil spent 0.22%. In some cases, oil companies are also abandoning renewable energy projects and cutting back on their low-carbon portfolio spending. BP and Shell, for example, are scrapping wind energy development this week. ExxonMobil revealed its updated corporate plan that includes reducing its spending on low-carbon investments by 1/3. Another category of oil company ads the report identifies as deceptive is one in which responsibility for reducing emissions is shifted onto individual consumers. BP, through its advertising and PR, for example, popularized the concept of the carbon footprint of an individual. The report says these types of ads deflect from the role that the oil and gas industry has played in locking society into dependency on its products. Big oil company advertisements touting natural gas as clean or climate-friendly or as an essential partner to renewable energy ignore the reality that gas still contributes substantially to climate change. Oil companies have used advertising to highlight and push false promises about carbon capture and storage and about hydrogen, claiming these technologies are key to a low-carbon future. Carbon capture technologies have existed for decades and have failed to sequester more than a minuscule amount of global emissions. Hydrogen, meanwhile, is conventionally produced using fossil fuels, and so-called green hydrogen made from water does not yet exist on any large scale. Despite company advertisements touting the promise of hydrogen, it remains decades away from wide-scale deployment, and almost all hydrogen production today is based on fossil fuels, contrary to its depictions in company ads as a clean fuel. ExxonMobil was never seriously committed to investing and scaling the algae biofuel technology, while ExxonMobil ended its funding for algae research entirely in late 2022. Hundreds of ads across these categories from BP, Chevron, ExxonMobil, and Shell over the last 25 years collectively feed a larger false narrative that oil and gas companies are part of the solution to climate change. Headlines: The New York Times, December 14, 2025. Germany AfD pushes to publish German information that officials say may help Russia. The New York Times. Indiana Reader Mailbag: A pause on gerrymanders and a risk in primaries. The New York Times. Headlines: The New York Times, December 13, 2025. Belarus frees prominent political prisoners as U.S. lifts some trade sanctions. The New York Times. Biden has raised little of what he needs to build a presidential library. The New York Times. Canada rush to buy stockpiles of boycotted U.S. liquor. The New York Times. China. Clean limitless energy exists. China is going big in the race to harness it. The New York Times. China opinion to outbuild China. America needs friends. The New York Times. Colorado officials reject the Trump pardon of a convicted election denier. The New York Times. Democrats. Is Jennifer Welch the toughest critic of Democrats? The New York Times. Florida. In the Florida Panhandle, a hearing on school vaccine mandates gets heated. The New York Times. India. How did the CIA lose a nuclear device in the Himalayas? The New York Times. India. Air pollution, opinion, life, and death in the India air apocalypse. The New York Times. Killing trees. Up all night in New York selling Christmas trees. The New York Times. Oklahoma opinion teachers became activists, and censorship followed. The New York Times. Republican amid fractures on the right. Tucker Carlson continues his attacks. The New York Times. RFK Jr. lack of knowledge about science and medicine is chewing gum bad for your health. The New York Times. RFK Jr. lack of knowledge of science and medicine risk-based screening works, as well as yearly checks after 40 in finding breast cancers. The New York Times. South Carolina RAWSEP view echoes of COVID-19 pandemic. From the article headline, a measles outbreak brings with it echoes of the pandemic. The New York Times. Syria. U.S. forces attacked in Syria. State media says. The New York Times. Trump ballroom. National Trust sues to block the Trump White House ballroom construction. The New York Times. Trump Biden fallout. How Biden lost faith of Americans in immigration. The New York Times. Trump bullying fallout. What should I do about the bully in my social circle? The New York Times. Trump Epstein fallout. New photos from Epstein estate show ties to Trump, Clinton, and more powerful men. The New York Times. Trump era opinion. Thomas L. Friedman says we are in a new epoch. David Brooks has questions. The New York Times. Trump healthcare fallout. For Republicans, the Trump hands-off approach to healthcare is a problem. The New York Times. Trump idea fallout opinion. Republican women versus the GOP. The New York Times. Trump idea fallout opinion. The closing of the MAGA mind. The New York Times. Trump idea fallout opinion. The reasonable majority is no longer silent. The New York Times. Trump Justice Department. In the Trump Justice Department failing in court might be better than bucking the boss. The New York Times. Trump Musk fallout. The Elon Musk SpaceX valued at $800 billion as it prepares to go public. The New York Times. Trump Republican fallout. The interview 3 senators who quit on why Congress will not stand up to Trump. The New York Times. TV Paramount says money is no object. Warner Brothers is not convinced. The New York Times. Ukraine. He was a Russian activist in exile. His own wife accused him of spying. The New York Times. Ukraine. Russia bombs Ukraine port of Odessa amid peace talks. The New York Times. United Kingdom. US-UK trade deal hits stumbling block. The New York Times Venezuela behind the daring escape to Oslo of the Venezuelan opposition leader. The New York Times Venezuela, for Rubio, the Cuba hawk. The road to Havana runs through Venezuela. The New York Times Venezuela opinion. The US seizes an oil tanker. What is next? The New York Times. Headlines. The New York Times, December 12, 2025. Affordability. Coffee interest in home coffee machines rising. The New York Times, Arkansas. State of Arkansas public television drops PBS. The New York Times, artificial intelligence. Trump moves to stop states from regulating AI with a new executive order. The New York Times. Colorado RAWSEP view election tampering. Trump federal pardon does not apply to state conviction in Colorado. From the article headline, Trump symbolically pardons Tina Peters, Colorado clerk, convicted of election tampering. The New York Times. China historic shift underway in the economy of China as investment slump deepens. The New York Times. China is getting much of what it wants from the U.S., including chips. The New York Times. Dirty energy. RAWSEP view necessary in the past, but not as cheap or convenient as clean energy today. From the article headline, archaeologists find oldest evidence of fire making. The New York Times. Europe. Germany accuses Russia of sabotage, cyberattacks, and disinformation. The New York Times. Indiana key takeaways after Indiana lawmakers defy the Trump redistricting push. The New York Times. Indiana State Senate Republicans reject the Trump redistricting effort. The New York Times. Oklahoma dirty energy. Harold Hamm, Oklahoma oil tycoon allies with Trump to reshape U.S. energy. The New York Times. Oklahoma lecturer sanctioned over MAGA white supremacy lesson is back in class. The New York Times. Trump ideas opinion. America is entering its third civil war. The New York Times. Trump healthcare fallout. Republicans undercut Johnson, circumventing him to force votes. The New York Times. Trump healthcare fallout. Senate deadlocks over Obamacare subsidies in dueling votes. The New York Times. Trump pardon of Democrat is Texas opinion. Trump is degrading the justice system. Democrats are helping. The New York Times. Ukraine worrying more about power cuts. See U.S. peace push as just noise. The New York. United Kingdom. King Charles to speak about his cancer in televised message. The New York Times. Headlines. The Guardian, December 13, 2025. Affordability. Coffee interest in home coffee machines rising. The New York Times. Arkansas. State of Arkansas public television drops PBS. The New York Times. Artificial intelligence. Trump moves to stop states from regulating AI with a new executive order. The New York Times. Bulgaria. Did we do that? Gen Z protesters help tip balance against the leaders of Bulgaria. The New York Times. China is getting much of what it wants from the U.S., including chips. The New York Times. China historic shift underway in economy of China as investment slump deepens. The New York Times. Colorado RAWSEP view election tampering. Trump federal pardon does not apply to state conviction in Colorado. From the article headline, Trump symbolically pardons Tina Peters, Colorado clerk, convicted of election tampering. The New York Times. Dirty energy. RAWSEP view wood burning was necessary in the past, but not as cheap or convenient as clean energy today. From the article headline, archaeologists find oldest evidence of fire making. The New York Times. Europe. Trump Musk fallout. Elon Musk tests the willingness of Europe to enforce its online laws. The New York Times. Germany accuses Russia of sabotage, cyberattacks, and disinformation. The New York Times. Indiana key takeaways after Indiana lawmakers defy the Trump redistricting push. The New York Times. Indiana State Senate Republicans reject the Trump redistricting effort. The New York Times. New York City. RAWSEP view soccer over football. Mamdani will be the first soccer-mad New York City mayor. The New York Times. Oklahoma dirty energy. Harold Hamm, Oklahoma oil tycoon allies with Trump to reshape U.S. energy. The New York Times. Oklahoma lecturer sanctioned over MAGA white supremacy lesson is back in class. The New York Times. Trump healthcare fallout. Republicans undercut Johnson, circumventing him to force votes. The New York Times. Trump healthcare fallout. Senate deadlocks over Obamacare subsidies in dueling votes. The New York Times. Trump ideas opinion. America is entering its third civil war. The New York Times. Trump pardon of Democrat is Texas opinion. Trump is degrading the justice system. Democrats are helping. The New York Times. TV. Jimmy Kimmel takes a swipe at the Trump gold card. The New York Times. Ukraine worrying more about power cuts. See U.S. peace push as just noise. The New York Times. United Kingdom. King Charles shares good news about his cancer treatment in video message. The New York Times. United Kingdom. King Charles to speak about his cancer in televised message. The New York Times. Headlines. The Guardian, December 12, 2025. Artificial intelligence affordability. Most people are not fretting about an AI bubble. What they fear is mass layoffs. Stephen Greenhouse. The Guardian. California RAWSEP view relatively clean fossil fuel has a problem of exploding. From the article headline, gas explosion in San Francisco Bay Area injures at least 6 people. California. The Guardian. Caribbean rebranded plantations, how empire-shaped luxury. Caribbean tourism slavery. The Guardian. Europe. Donald Trump is pursuing regime change in Europe. Jonathan Friedland. The Guardian. Europe. Donald Trump wants a Europe in chaos, a sure sign for Britain to shore up its democracy. Polly Toynbee. The Guardian. Europe. EU has a plan to use frozen Russian assets to fund Ukraine. How will it work? Ukraine. The Guardian. Europe. EU to freeze 210 billion euros in Russian assets indefinitely. European Union. The Guardian. Farmers' soil is more important than oil inside the perennial grain revolution environment. The Guardian. France. If the US forces me to choose between my two nationalities, I choose France. And Europe. Alexander Hurst. The Guardian. Germany. Russian ambassador summoned to Berlin over claims Kremlin is seeking to destabilize Germany. Europe. Live. Indiana Republicans reject effort to redraw voting maps in rebuke to Trump. Indiana. The Guardian. Influencer RAWSEP view influenced by money to spread views against vaccines while denying the actor himself is against vaccines. Narrator for hire no brain in gear. From the article headline, Liam Neeson denies anti-vax views after narrating COVID documentary. Liam Neeson. The Guardian. King Charles hails reduction in cancer treatment as milestone in his recovery. King Charles III. The Guardian. RAWSEP view favorite pun of the day because a clementine is a type of orange. From the article headline, My Darling Clementine. Why did Chalamet and Jenner dress in matching orange? Timothy Chalamet. The Guardian. RFK Jr. Lack of knowledge of science and medicine. RFK Jr. is a danger to public health, but local Maha laws could be a bigger threat. Katrina Vanden Heuvel. The Guardian. Stephen Colbert on the Trump gold card pay to play program for rich foreigners. Late night TV roundup. The Guardian. Taylor Swift. The end of of an era review as she breaks down over the terror plot it is. Impossible not to feel her pain. Taylor Swift, The Guardian, the Paris Climate Treaty, changed the world. Here is how Rebecca Solnit, The Guardian, Trump-Epstein fallout. As Epstein files release looms, questions abound on what happens next. Possibilities are endless. Jeffrey Epstein, The Guardian, Trump-Epstein fallout. House Democrats release Epstein photos, with Trump banning Clinton and others. Jeffrey Epstein. The Guardian, Trump healthcare fallout. Republicans and Democrats can work together on healthcare, says Trump as rise in premiums looms. Trump Kirk fallout. Accused Charlie Kirk killer makes first in-person court appearance. Charlie Kirk shooting. The Guardian, Trump news. At a glance, President sick of meetings as Ukraine-Russia peace deal talks drag on Trump administration. The Guardian. Trump signs executive order aimed at preventing states from regulating AI. U.S. News. The Guardian. United Kingdom, Venezuela dangerous and scary. How a U.S. Special Forces vet helped Maria Corina Machado flee Venezuela. The Guardian headlines. Other media. December 13, 2025. Alabama Democrat Doug Jones runs for Alabama governor. December 12, 2025. Dirty energy advertising. The big oil climate ads have propped up fake promises and false solutions for past 25 years. Report finds inside climate news.
Red Green Fox here. The quick red green fox jumped over the barriers to clean air. Red Green Fox here. Ready to sing to you the names of the 2025 major wood-burning biomass industry subsidy opponents. 1. Biofuel Watch. 2. Bulkley Valley Stewardship Coalition of British Columbia, Canada. 3. Comite Schoen Lucht, which means Beautiful Air Committee in German. 4. Dogwood Alliance. 5. Equity Group Foundation, nicknamed EGF. 6. Environmental Paper Network, nicknamed EPN. 7. Natural Resources Defense Council, nicknamed NRDC. 8. Prakaunia Narzeks Wysokie Istot, which means Workshop for All Beings in Polish. 9. Rachel Carson Council. 10 Solutions for Our Climate, nicknamed SFOC.
Cat's corner strategy with Tiger and Leone. Saying the quiet part out loud. Roar. Hi, I am Tiger. Our human asked us to get up from our naps and start Cat's Corner strategy with Tiger and Leone. She gave us a list of internet allies, which we will post for her here.
Hi, I am Leone. It is better for your mental fitness to go to these websites than to go to bro sites for advice. Substack letters from an American Heather Cox Richardson. Substack your local epidemiologist. The Midas Touch. The Guardian. The New York Times.
One introduction. RAWSEP view. The United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only for home building and furniture building. For just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree. But it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen, and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM 2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lung, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM 2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom. The Eco-Design Wood Stove International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RAWSEP view. Purple air. PM 2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM 2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM 2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.